Hi, everyone. Good morning. I will jump right in this morning. I want to start, I'll share my screen, which has material that is similar to what Julie, I think, shared already in the chat box. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a share. Okay, I hope that worked. Yeah, it looks like that worked. So I want to start, and I need to adjust my screen here a little bit. And I'm gonna, if you need to adjust your own screen to make it bigger or smaller, please do that. And my computer's a little slow and so much going on here. So I just want to focus our attention for a moment on where we are in the Torah, in Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. And I know this is a group that, this is an impressive and knowledgeable group, and some of you I know are on every week, but I think it's still worth grounding ourselves in where we are in the book of Numbers. So you can see I have an outline here that I adapted from Everett Fox's translation, and I highlighted here our Torah portion, our Parsha Balak, which always, for years it confused me because the main character is really Bilaam and they sound so similar. So it is Parashat Balak, but the main character who we're gonna talk about today is Bilaam, and we're at the very end. You can see it's in Roman numeral 2, rebellions, but it's really the final stories, the final narratives before the Israelites enter into the wilderness. And at the very end of Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, there are things that are more legal. There are legal narratives, legal material. So we're at the very end of some of the key stories. And scholars actually believe that these chapters, 22, 23, and 24, if you're someone who is open to thinking a little bit about the historical nature of the books of the Torah, I'm going to speak from that perspective for a moment. Scholars actually believe that these 3 chapters were edited by a separate scribal circle. So I find it really exciting and interesting to think about the way that the Torah was written, and these chapters here are different from much of the rest of the Torah, and we'll encounter some of that today, including a talking donkey. And I want to point out also, before we begin, here are a couple of maps, and I'm going to make this bigger. This is also in your document, which you can increase the size of. You really have to kind of zoom in here, but we're going to talk about the land of Moab here, or Moab in English, on the right, where I'm pointing this out. And you can see this is a map that years ago I took a picture of from a textbook from my own graduate work. It was in it's an Intro to Bible textbook, and a good map, I think. So we're going to talk about Moab and also Midian, which those 2 nations can be interrelated in the Hebrew Bible. So they'll both be mentioned in our chapter today. And then also, just to point out here's a map of the ancient Near East. The Bilaam hails from somewhere east of the land of Israel in Mesopotamia, along the Tigris or the Euphrates. Let me just get out of this for a second. Whoops. The Euphrates is not labeled here, but it's the western river, and the eastern river is the Tigris. So that should geographically orient us and also textually orient us to where we are today. I want to jump right into the text, but Julie mentioned, I always like to say, first of all, I rarely see the chat. So if you're sending questions to me or you're posing questions to me, I'm not likely going to see them quickly. If you don't get to ask a question, or if you want to email me with a reflection afterwards, I'm putting my email in the chat if I don't get to see a comment or a question. So I'm going to jump right into the text, and then we'll pause for reflections in 5 or 10 minutes, maybe less. So what I want us to do today, and I'm going to switch shared screens here. So bear with me as I do that. Julie, by any chance, are you able to do the share? Is that possible? Or would you prefer if I do it?
Of the PDF?
Yeah.
Could do that.
Okay, that would be super helpful.
Let's see.
And as Julie begins to do that, I'm going to ask for a volunteer reader. So if somebody wants to volunteer to read quite a few verses, that would be helpful. Okay. Okay, Julie, thank you. Okay, so if Julie, if you're able to scroll down to page 1, to the first text page. That would be great. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so what you'll see here in chapter 22, and this is a document that has chapters 22, 23, and 24. We're not going to read the each chapter today, but we are going to read what we can of chapter 22 and some of chapter 22. And you'll see that throughout the text, there are some highlights. Green refers to when the verb see is used, which Robert Alter, the great translator of the Hebrew Bible, points out is a frequently used verb in this chapter. And blue is about blessing of Israel, and pink is about God being in control. And I want us to think about those three themes, which you can see in your PDF, in your own PDF, if you want to look back. But I will remind everyone that these three themes that come up, blessing, the blessing of Israel, seeing, and God being in control, that's what I want us to think about today, and how those things relate, and what a message might be about the interrelatedness of those three themes of seeing, blessing, and God's control. So I see Elaine volunteered to read. So Elaine, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so
oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
When to start.
I will do that.
Okay. The Israelites then marched on and encamped in the steppes of Moab across the Jordan from Jericho. Balak, son of Zippor, saw that all that Israel had come to sorry, I'm going to start again. Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was alarmed because that people was so numerous. Moab dreaded the Israelites, and Moab said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde will lick clean all that is about us, as an ox licks up the
donkey, yeah,
of the field." Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messages to Bilaam, son of Beor in Pethor, which is by the Euphrates in the land of his kinfolk, and to invite him, saying, "There is a people that came out of Egypt. It hides the earth from view, and it is settled next to me. Come then, put a curse upon this people for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps I can thus defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed indeed, and he whom you curse is cursed." Balak.
Okay, thank you very much. I also hear some back noise. Can people hear me clearly? Julie, can you hear me clearly? Okay, great. So let's stop there because there's a lot of, that's even, I think, a lot of text so far. So there's this, I'm just going to summarize and then we'll begin to analyze together. And Julie, if you want to pause the share, I think I'll pick up and share after I summarize for a bit. So in this part of the story, there's a guy named Balak. He's the king of Moab, and he's fearful after he sees that the Israelites have conquered a people called the Amorites nearby. And there's just a few verses about that at the end of Numbers 21. And he wants this famous seer, and in fact, there's an inscription, an archaeological inscription that mentions Bilaam, a seer from probably about the 8th century. So there's this famous seer, and he wants this guy to come and curse Israel. That's the request here. And in verse 12, as our reader just read, thank you to our reader whose name is escaping me. So if you want to remind me, that would be great. I would like to, oh, Elaine, thank you for reading. So in verse 12, in verse 6, Balak says, I know whoever you bless will be blessed, and I know whoever you curse will be cursed. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can all take a look at that repeated theme again and again. So I'm going to go ahead and do that momentarily. Okay, so you can see here, again in verse 12, after Bilaam consults with God to say, listen, what should I do? Bilaam is supposedly this prophet and has a relationship with God. And God says at first, don't go with them. You should not curse the Israelite people, even though Balak wants you to curse the Israelite people. They are a blessed people, and it really won't be possible for you to do that. And what ensues is a back and forth between Bilaam and these Moabite dignitaries, and a new set of dignitaries is sent. And then Bilaam says, well, let me double check with God. Since you're offering me some money to curse the Israelites, I'm just going to double check and see if actually I can do this. And God says in verse 13, sorry, let me just find the correct verse here. That's not the correct verse. In 18, no, a little further down. In 20, okay. In 20, God says to Bilaam, listen, if you want to go with these guys, you can go, but whatever I do, that's what you're going to do. So I want to pause here for a moment before we break into a new part of the story, the talking donkey part of the story, to think about so far, and especially paying attention to the blessing theme and also the theme of God being in control. What do you make so far of this story? What do you think what are your reflections on this story so far of the two interactions between Balak and the king, Balak and Bilaam, deciding whether or not Bilaam is going to go and try and curse the Israelites, at first refusing and then saying, fine, I'll go, but God is in control. So I would like to hear 1, 2, or 3 reflections, your thoughts on this part of the story so far. Or certainly questions or clarification.
Folks can use the raise hand function, or if you want to put in the chat box that you have a comment or a question, we'll get you unmuted.
Okay, and if there are no comments or questions at this point, then, 2 participants raise their hand. So we'll take those 2 participants and then we'll go ahead and shift to the next part of the story. So Leslie, I see your raised hand. Would you like
Yeah,
to jump in?
yeah. I think God figured that Bilaam will continue to come back. He was motivated. So even if God would say, no, don't go, he will come back again and ask again and again and again. So finally God,
Hmm.
took a shortcut, said, go, but only you can do what I tell you to do.
Okay. Thank you. And Lauren, would you like to share your reflection or ask a question?
Yeah, I have a question for you. I thought that Bilaam was not Jewish, and
He is
so
not.
and
He's
I'm not sure how he's classified as a prophet, but I guess there are prophets in non-Jewish religions. But my question is, why would he go to the Jewish God to ask for permission when he was not a Jew? And maybe he's asking for the key to get into the door. I don't know, but it's confusing to me why they would rely on a non-Jew to start this whole process.
Why Balak, the Moabite king, would rely on a non-Israelite? We'll use the word Israelite since
Israelite.
they really were
Israelite,
not
sorry.
Jews at this time. Okay, so it's a really interesting thing. It does seem like this prophet has a relationship with the Israelite God. It's something certainly interesting to notice. I don't know, there's no particular answer that I can give you except for the way that the story was written. Yes, there were certainly non-Israelite prophets, and the way this prophet is portrayed in some ways is very positive. He does have a relationship with the Israelite God. So it is curious. It is something, I'm glad you noticed it, but I don't have a specific answer as to why. I don't think the story would make sense in the Torah if maybe he were having this back and forth with a non-Israelite God, but it is curious, and I'm glad you raised it. So we'll take one more. The next hand that I saw was Noreen, and then we'll shift.
I was just noting that the reason Balak summons Bilaam is because he's afraid of what he's heard has happened to the countries that have met up with the Israelites, and he's somehow reluctant to fight them, but is looking for alternative ways of fighting them, and so he's calling on Bilaam. I don't think it's clear that Bilaam is addressing the Israelite God.
Oh,
Addressing God, it doesn't say which God. Specific.
It's very interesting. Yeah, it does say Elohim, for example, in verse 12, which it doesn't use the word Yod-He, Vav-He here.
Right.
So that is something worth noting. I think further down, and I'll have to double check as we keep reading, I think further down it does use the verb Yod-He, Vav-He. But Elohim can mean, it doesn't necessarily only mean the Israelite God. So that's actually something worth noting, and I'm sure there's probably commentary and scholarship on that. So thank you, Noreen. Okay, so let's move on to this next part of the story, and I'll ask for another reader, and we'll still, I want us to still be thinking about God's control, blessing, and seeing vision. Carol, were you volunteering to read? We can.
No, I wanted to make a comment.
Okay, so we do have to keep going. So I would like to ask if there is anyone who would like to volunteer to read from verse 21. Emily, are you volunteering to read?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So read from verse 21, if you don't mind. And I think we're going to try and get through verse 35, but let's see, I may interject if you don't mind.
When he arose in the morning, Balaam saddled his ass and departed with the Moabite dignitaries. But God was incensed at his going, so an angel of the Lord placed himself in his way as an adversary. He was riding on his she-ass with 2 servants alongside, when the ass caught sight of the angel of the Lord standing in the way, with his drawn sword in his hand. The ass swerved from the road and went into the fields, and Balaam beat the ass to turn her back onto the road. The angel of the Lord then stationed himself in a lane between the vineyards with a fence on either side. The ass, seeing the angel of the Lord, pressed herself against the wall and squeezed Balaam's foot against the wall, so he beat her again. Once more, the angel of the Lord moved forward and stationed himself on a spot so narrow that there was no room to swerve right or left. When the ass now saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam, and Balaam was furious and beat the ass with his stick. Then the Lord opened the ass's mouth, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you have beaten me these 3 times?" Balaam said to the ass, "You have made a mockery of me. If I had a sword with me, I'd kill you." The ass said to Balaam, "Look, I am the ass that you have been riding all along until this day. Have I been in the habit of doing thus to you?" And he answered, "No." Then the Lord uncovered Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, his drawn sword in his hand. Thereupon he bowed right down to the ground. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you beaten your ass these 3 times? It is I who came out as an adversary, for the errand is obnoxious to me. And when the ass saw me, she shied away because of me these 3 times. If she had not shied away from me, you are the one I should have killed while sparing her." Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, "I erred because I did not know that you are standing in my way. If you still disapprove, I will turn back." But the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, "Go with the men, but you must say nothing except what I tell you." So Balaam went on with Balak's dignitaries.
Okay, thank you very much for that lovely reading. So just to briefly summarize, God, before this talking donkey section, says to Bilaam, okay, you can go, but whatever comes out of your mouth, it's from me. But then when he actually goes, God is angry, and God's messenger or angel, in Hebrew, malach, can be an angel or messenger. Here it's translated as angel. Something is in the way of the donkey. The donkey gets very upset and is trying to move one way or the other, and Balaam cannot see what the donkey can see. And eventually the angel makes itself known to Bilaam, and the donkey also sort of claims innocence, which is, I think it's supposed to be a humorous story, and says like, I've never done this to you before. Why are you blaming me? And again, God says, fine, or the angel of God this time says, fine, you can go with these men, but again, what's going to come out of your mouth is going to be from me. So one of the classic questions with this is why, if God said to Bilaam, you have free choice, you can go ahead and go with these dignitaries, why would God then get angry? One of the answers given in the commentaries is that God was testing Bilaam, and Bilaam failed. But also, again, when we think about this from the perspective of what's called source criticism, there seems to be multiple strands of the Bilaam story, and in this does seem to portray Bilaam not as positively as some of the other stories, as some of the other parts of the story. In the end, the ending is the same, and verse 35 is the same as the way we ended the section before. If you want to go, go, but only good is going to come out of your mouth, or only what I tell you, what I, God, tell you. So notice, I just want to point out a few things that come afterwards, and then I want to open it up for your reflections. In verse 38, well, let me back up and say what ensues is several interactions between Bilaam and Balak, where Bilaam says, okay, let's have a ceremony. I'm going to go ahead and sacrifice. I'm going to go talk to God, and then I'm going to come back and tell you what I heard. And every single time, Bilaam comes back and blesses the Israelites. And each time, Balak hopes for a different result and sends Bilaam back to connect with God. They sacrifice. And finally, one of the things that is famous few lines that come out of this, in addition to many beautiful blessings about the people of Israel, the Ma Tovu section of the prayer book actually comes from this section in the book of Numbers where Bilaam says, how good are your tents, O Jacob? Jacob is a synonym for Israel. Your dwellings, O Israel. And in Hebrew, that's Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yisrael. That's a song that young children often learn. And it's at the very beginning of the Siddur, of the Jewish prayer book, in the morning services. So many of the parts of these blessings are beautiful. And I encourage you to read all of 23 and 24 if you can. But this is one of the most famous lines. And it's also, as I mentioned a few moments ago, I'm going to switch. I'm going to pause the share right now. And actually, let me scroll up and show you and just focus us back on these key themes here. For example, the donkey sees more than Bilaam sees. And there's the sense that Israel, no matter what, is going to be blessed. And certainly that God is in control. There does seem to be a little bit of a tension between free will and God in control in this story. After all, Bilaam did choose to go. But in the end, there are so many passages so many verses about God being in control. So I want to pause here and think with you for a bit. We'll start with 3 reflections and then we'll take it from there, and certainly questions. Also, what do you make of this story so far, including, and in particular, these 3 themes that emerge out of this perhaps humorous and amusing story today? So, Julie, I'll let you go ahead and call on, since I haven't seen hands raised very much in the order in which they were raised.
Did you want to stop the share?
I can stop the share, yeah.
There were a couple of questions first in the chat box, and then I see a couple of hands raised. So Richard asked, are these, this is referring to the donkey passages, are these literal occurrences that happened, i.e. the donkey talking, or metaphorical traditional stories to apply?
Yeah, so that depends on who you ask. You know, some people do take the story literally and would think of it as difficult to think about the story as anything but literal. For me, the story is not literal. For me, the story is certainly metaphorical. I don't actually think a donkey opened its mouth and spoke. I think it's a beautiful literary story where there are messages for us to glean.
Thank you. And a question from Mrs. Jacob Johnson. Is there something in the Hebrew that indicates that Bilaam was not trustworthy to only speak what he's commanded to speak?
That's an interesting question. So I can look at the Hebrew more closely here. I would have to take a few minutes to do that, not on Zoom. And you're welcome to email me. I think both in Hebrew and in English, we get the sense that Bilaam is, I don't know, we sort of get this mixed sense about Bilaam. On the one hand, he does try to do what God wants. And on the other hand, he does choose to go, which it doesn't seem that God approves of that. But I think the sense is both the same in the Hebrew and in the English. I don't think the English, I think the English certainly captures the Hebrew here.
Raylan, go ahead.
I would just like to comment on where we are going or where we have been here. I find the story to be full of mystery, considering that God told Abraham that those who bless you will be blessed and those who curse you will be cursed. So when I'm reading this story, to me it's very suspenseful, especially if you read it afresh in your mind with that thought about Abraham.
Huh.
It's kind of neat because you're wondering, is he going to get cursed? Is he going to get blessed? What's he going to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, blessing in the Torah is certainly a theme, and definitely, thank you for bringing in that Abraham-God interaction from Genesis. God does say, whoever blesses you, I will bless, and whoever curses you, I will curse. So thank you. It's a lovely connection. Let me offer, I want to offer a couple of ideas and then hear your responses, either to those ideas or more generally. So I want to mention, and I think I will share my screen briefly for this part. So let me just share my screen. I think this will be it. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the screen. I want to be able to present to you, just so that you can see here the verses organized thematically. So the verses in green are about seeing. The verses in blue are about blessing, a lot of verses about blessing. And the verses in pink here about God being in control. So at first, for me, the story was initially about the inevitability of the blessing of the people of Israel. Not something I would have said maybe even 10 years ago, but I do feel proud to be a descendant and part of the Jewish people, a resilient people. And for me personally, I feel like it's fair to say in many ways I'm part of a blessed people, a resilient, blessed people. Certainly there's complexity there, and with the challenges and the persecution Jews have endured over the years, I don't want to claim that I'm not seeing that, but I do feel that the story speaks to a certain inevitable blessed nature of the Jewish people. And I find that very moving and powerful. I want to throw out one more idea and see what you think. The other piece here, and I was very influenced by something I read from Rabbi Shai Held in his book of commentary on the Parsha, which is called The Heart of the Torah. And he talks about the ability to, and I'm going to paraphrase to some degree based on where I was going with this story, but there's a sense here that we need to and we should work to see things that we might not naturally see. In other words, we should open our eyes not only to see blessings, so I think that's true, but maybe we should be opening our eyes to see, in addition to blessings, the things that we can't control. And in the same way that Bilaam struggled to see, perhaps Bilaam is an example of the way we humans struggle sometimes in our own self-perception and in our own perception of things that we can and we can't control. For me, that's what the story, in addition to being about resilience of the Jewish people, it seems to me to be a story about opening our eyes as much as we can to the things that we cannot control, but also the things that we should be grateful for, the blessings in our lives. And Rabbi Shai Held talks about the not yet. And I think that's part of the story. Sometimes, like Bilaam, we don't see the obstacles in front of us. We cannot see them. We are blind to them. And only when the right time comes, only when a certain time comes, then our eyes are open. But we can't always, even if we're trying to perceive other people's feelings or in a difficult relationship, we can't always see things until the time is right. So I wanted to present those ideas to you, the strength and resilience of the Jewish people, the idea of seeing things, but not being able to control necessarily when we actually see them, and see what you think of those different ideas. So I'm going to open it up for hopefully at least 3 reflections at the moment. So Julie, I'll let you go ahead and call on those.
Thanks, Abby. I know folks have had their hands raised for a while, so I'm not sure if the comments will be in response to what you just said, but let's start with Carol.
Thank you. I am fascinated by seeing the part of the story where God appears to be talking to Bilaam, and Bilaam appears to be talking to him. For years, I've always seen this perspective from the Jewish perspective of just what you were sharing, our blessing, God taking care of us. And clearly that was going to be the end of the story regardless. But it seems to be working with this Gentile man and giving him a choice and not taking away his free will. And Bilaam says he considers all the things and he chooses the path of greed, really. He wants to be paid, and so he decides to do that. And God allows him to do that. And the consequence is death because he chose greed, and the king and everyone was mad. He probably sent his assassins after him. So it's like, it's just fascinating, we don't think about the relationship that God extends to all of humanity all the time. Our perspective is on what we do. I just wanted to bring that point up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Greta.
I sort of want to follow on Carol's point there, in that I think the mode of interaction that we see God having with Balaam is really interesting here, in that Balaam gets a solid answer on his first ask and then sort of wants to ride this thing as far as it goes, trying to find a way where he can both give the answer that he's been given and then also get in on this cash reward element. And I appreciate the irony of him being a seer who can't see, and also a speaker who can only speak as far as God allows them, which is the same condition God extends to a donkey. So I feel like I agree with Carol that there's this sort of like harsh ending. There's a punishment aspect, but there's also sort of playfulness in this. You asked me, I gave you an answer. Is it not good enough for you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a playfulness here throughout the whole story. Thank you.
Jennifer.
Hello, hi. Thank you for your lovely share. I found it rather interesting that Bilaam is actually conversing with God because, he's not Jewish and he's reached a very high level, conversing with God. And I understand that Bilaam stood on a mountaintop to see Israel camped below. And the first time it failed for him. And then he went a second time on another mountaintop and that failed. And then a third time he went on another mountaintop and that failed. He gave up. And I wondered if Hashem, each time intended the curses into a beautiful blessing, but we can't help but ask why he keeps moving from mountaintop to mountaintop. And then I thought maybe he thinks that he's entitled to his high position. And, it's easier when you're up above looking below. And Hashem changed around his words. So he was forced to see that the very words that he was saying were elevating actually the people in Israel to stand on a high instead of below. I don't know. That's my take.
It's interesting. I mean, he did, yes, he stood up on a mountain each time and he saw some of the people. I think for me, that part of the story is about, we keep trying things that we know aren't going to work. Yeah, maybe that the word doesn't resonate so much. It's more about this kind of persistence that's ineffective. It's ineffectual. It's, how many times, people say the definition of insanity is to try the same thing again and again, which is what Bilaam keeps doing. So, I don't see it so much as God transforming his words, but I see it more so as God really, Bilaam opens himself up. He told Balak, and I think he knew that only the good things were about to come out of his, that he would do whatever God wanted. And only good came out of his mouth. So, yeah, so I don't think it's an unfair interpretation, your interpretation, to see a sense of entitlement. I see that too. What resonates more for me is this trying something again and again that you know is not going to work.
Yeah.
So we have to wrap up momentarily, but I really appreciate everyone's different perspectives today. And I know it's a rich story with many different directions that you could go in your interpretation. So I encourage people to read the story again and again. And again, I'll just share, for me, the story was very much about, not only about the resilience of the Jewish people, but also the way in which Bilaam is an example of human nature, and we humans who sometimes think we see things clearly, but we don't always, and we have to wait in order to see blessing and see the things, and to be able to make clear distinctions between the things that we do and we don't have control over. So with that, and with all of our ideas together today, I wish everyone continued enriching Torah study and analysis, and Shabbat Shalom, and a beautiful weekend. So thank you all for coming today, and I look forward to seeing folks again in the fall.